Hello everyone, Phreak here. This is a video about what I would do if I were the lone developer of League of Legends I would hope, positively affect the gameplay impact, both for the players playing the champions and those playing against them, for crit-based marksmen. And for the rest of this video, I'm going to be calling them AD carries, and specifically only talking about the crit-based ones. We'll talk about the other ones really briefly in kind of the intro, but that's what I would do. And the first thing I want to bring up is that there is, I think, a problem space, and it's that crit marksmen are, one, not well differentiated from one another. So looking at champions like typically Ashe and Caitlyn and Tristana and Jinx, they all do, with some small exceptions, roughly the same things. They auto-attack you until you die, and they do it in usually uninteresting ways. Now, certainly, yes, there is some differentiation. Ashe has Hawkshot, Ashe has Enchanted Crystal Arrow, she has a global stun, right? Like, those things are different, but in order for Ashe to kill you, she clicks on you and then presses Q and W when their cooldowns are up, and that's the champion. This is not really any different from Tristana, other than you replace the letter W with the letter E, and she presses the letters Q and E and clicks on you, right? These champions do the same things, and they simply auto-attack you until you die, and you don't dodge auto-attacks unless you're playing literally Jax or Shen, and you don't stop them from auto-attacking unless you are stunning them or blinding them in some way. The options are limited. You don't physically dodge anything. Like if you're playing against a Zeal, you can flash the ultimate, and there's cool things that can happen. This tends to not happen with crit marksmen. Now, I'm saying crit marksman specifically because I think most of the other marksman cast works pretty well. You look at a champion like Vayne, and she cares a lot about silver bolts and tumble. She is forcibly short range. She has no tools beyond her basic attack range, and if she only attacks once with rapid fire cannon, she doesn't do anything. She must get that third auto off. That's where all of her damage comes from. She has to tumble around and turn invisible to reposition herself. That's really, really important. Even a champion like Kog'Maw, that, to be fair, sometimes does break down on a sort of mechanics layer. When his W is on, he's a killing machine with obscene range, and you can't do anything about it aside from cast Windwall. When his W is off, he gets out-damaged by almost every other champion in the game and outranged by all the other marksmen. Kog'Maw is not mechanically that difficult, but W on and W off is a huge power shift, and thus there is a really important timing sort of element to the character. And these mechanically easy but decision-making heavy champions do exist. The basic, best example of this is actually Singed. Very recently, and I'll link how you can find this yourself if you haven't seen it before, very recently one of the data scientists at Riot showed, I think it was like the top 10 most difficult champion, my words, not his, in terms of saying, okay, for your first game on the champion and your 100th game on the champion, how much more effective in terms of win rate, 45 versus 55, or even more so in some cases, how much more effective are you if you've put 100 games onto the champion? And Singed is a top 10 pick. Singed has 0 skill shots. I mean, you can kind of consider W, but like, learning to toggle on Poison Trail takes 3 games. Understanding that fling is a good ability, you fling a person. Like, the mechanics are insanely easy on Singed. And yet, he is one of the top 10 hardest to play champions in all of League of Legends, a cast of 140, because decision making is hard. Making the right choices is hard, and so Kog'Maw is an example of this. Okay, so that is the problem space. One is that I think most marksmen, or I should say crit marksmen, are not well differentiated. Kog'Maw and Vayne and Lucian all have different outputs. I'm saying that Ashe and Tristana mostly don't. The other piece that I'm going to bring up is something that feels like it's happening pretty recently in League of Legends, is lower agency, where these champions take a really big dip in power in the mid game, and the promise is that in the late game you'll catch back up and get your 3 crit items and then win the game by yourself. And I mean, on the one hand, I don't think that's actually that healthy of a pattern. Sit through a trough, then win the game 1v9. I don't think that's really great. I know that's sort of partially the promise that is being given to crit marksmen that, yes, you're the hyperscalers. You are the end game 1v9 champion. And, to a degree, that's reasonably healthy in terms of just saying, I want to be the late game player, right? It's the dream that Vhagar and Nasus give you. Ironically, those are mid-game champions, not late-game champions, but, that's still the dream, and I understand that, feeding that power fantasy is useful. But I'm saying low agency in the sense that when you really hit a very shallow power trough in the mid-game, it can feel really bad to be powerless. And it feels like with game times getting faster, and intentionally so by Riot's game design team, being useful in the mid-game seems more and more important. Now, maybe the ultimate solution is mid-game becomes less important, and then you get to be this late-game champion, but I don't see us going that way that much. Okay, so those are the problem statements I have, that a lot of crit marksmen are not well differentiated, and that most crit marksmen have really low agency. Okay, so my supposition here for this is that abilities make champions interesting, right? Kog'Maw is known for his W. Vayne is known for her silver bolts. Lucian is known for, really kind of the entire kit. Maybe the W is a bit boring, but the rest of the kit feels very Lucian. Right? Kalista is really known for her passive and for Rend, and the ultimate's there and pretty cool as well. But the point is that the abilities really make what's interesting about these champions. Their base stats may be identical. Their ranges and base health and attack damage growth could all be the exact same. That doesn't really matter because their abilities differentiate them. That's the important part that really separates champion A from champion B and makes you want to play one and not the other. And so because of that, my solution is to overall make the active abilities consume more of the power budget of crit-based marksmen. Now, consuming the budget means that it has to be taken from somewhere else to be given to the abilities. And this could be things like crit items being a little bit less efficient or giving less critical strike chance, or just simply a 6-item build for a crit marksman just having lower DPS. And that's doable by simply with doing some level of math finagling with the items themselves. Giving a bit less attack speed, giving a bit less crit, giving a bit more attack damage. There's ways to turn these things around to lower the overall DPS. There are ways. Now, there is a caveat here, which is you can't change the items too much, otherwise people just stop buying Infinity Edge, and everyone just buys Blade of the Ruin King, and now you're buying the same items in every character, and you've probably failed when you've done this. So I think you need to keep the crit items still enticing, because crit is a playstyle people like. Having bright red numbers with exclamation points at the end is satisfying and is really cool, and that is an expected sort of layer of power and growth that players want. It's why they play champions like Jinx. It's to get a Hurricane and an Infinity Edge and crit 3 targets every auto attack. That's the fun part of Jinx. But what I'm saying is that we need to make the abilities, at least I think we need to make the abilities and the active abilities, the damaging abilities, the ones that provide you your power, should be more of the power budget, and just simply auto-attacking can be less. And again, these can be siphoned off from the items themselves within reason. They can be siphoned off of base stats within reason. Things can be done, I think, and we'll see if this is enough, and you guys can keep listening to me. So the actions I would take are twofold. Number one is to make every damaging ability on every marksman kit within reason scale off total attack damage. Most abilities scale off bonus attack damage. Some scale off total. The difference is that one of them rolls in the champion's base stats and the other doesn't. Now, the first thing someone's going to say is, but that's going to make them overpowered. You're just adding 60 to 100 damage to every ability. Now, keep in mind that I'm clearly saying this, that you're going to, of course, compensate the base damage of the ability to make them roughly fair. Caitlyn Q has like 30 base damage on it because it has a 1.1 total attack damage ratio, which gives you the other 60. The ability does 90 damage. It says 30 plus 60 on the tooltip. Ashe's Volley, I think, has 20 base damage as well, but it's 20 base damage plus roughly 1 times your total attack damage, so it does that already. But, for example, Tristana's E is a bonus attack damage ratio. The base damage is just 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, roughly that, and then a sort of scaling bonus attack damage ratio. So once you're at rank 5 of the ability, it's done scaling. It's now waiting for you to buy items, and I think that should change. And the reason I think that should change is because it can, 1, smooth out the power curve, and 2, delay some of their damage toward late game, or in different words, consume more of the late game power budget. So let's take Tristana as our example. Levels 1 through 9, assuming you max explosive charge first, could be roughly the same ability. You could choose to target a level 9 Tristana with rank 5E. You can target that damage. You can say it's going to be identical. We're going to have the same attack damage ratio and the same adjusted for base stats base damage. That's completely doable. That's not hard at all. That's very simple math. And if you do that, if you say, yes, we're going to peg the level 9 character at the same spot, then, explosive charge goes up and to the right, and it gets to here, and then it would just scale at level 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, up to 18. And then level 18 Tristana, more of her power budget is in a more powerful explosive charge. Her attack damage per level could go down by 0.2. Her attack speed per level could go down by 0.5%. There are ways to lower her DPS output as her E damage scales up. And that means that she simply does less auto attack damage and her explosive charge does more damage. And there are numbers at which you can target these two things and the character has the same power level. And yet a level 13 Tristana has a more powerful explosive charge for not losing very much of other things. It's a very light touch, but it would do something. This is how you make abilities stay relevant, at least a little bit, throughout game time. And there are minor things you can do along this as well. You could make crit marksmen gain less attack speed per level and more attack damage per level. They could scale up to, going up to like 125 base attack damage at 18, which would further that sort of thrust towards your champion's base stats are automatically thrust into the ability, and thus it's more powerful. The way it works out right now, most crit marksmen have one offensive ability that just deals direct damage by itself. For Tristana, that's E. For Ashe, that's W. For Jinx, that's her W. The rest of them often tend to be steroids of some kind, but there's really only one ability that does anything by itself. There's a few counterexamples. Caitlyn, actually, her Q and W scale up with damage, and her power curve ends up being a bit smooth. Ever since her traps got essentially bonus damage on them, that you attack them and you get more damage, she suddenly had a smoother power curve and had a decent mid-game, even though she was a traditionally crit-scaling marksman. Kalista didn't always buy crit, to be fair. Her items were a bit more smooth in the first place, but both her E and her Q scale. Her Q scales off total attack damage, and her E, I'm pretty certain, does as well, and thus she was able to have a smoother power curve. And I think that's useful that this champion can have agency at all times. Again, the champion needs to be balanced. You need to find the right compensation to keep them from being OP, but you can allow the champion to have a mid-game by having this happen. So I will say one more thing about this first point, which is that it is a way, especially, to make level 18 champions be less auto-attack focused. Or less auto-attack reliant, and allows your counterplay to exist in more places, because at the end of the day, a level 18 Tristana and a level 18 Caitlyn do roughly the same things. They attack you from 650 range a lot. And the rest of the abilities are used to escape sometimes. Like, Caitlyn famously stops pressing Q in late game because it's DPS negative. Rocket Jump is only ever way to get out, so you can keep auto-attacking. Same with Buster Shot. You push them away so you can keep auto-attacking. The abilities lose focus as time goes on, and I think that's a missed opportunity where these champions could have more of their power budget be in their aggressive offensive abilities that deal direct damage in some way, so that you can play around the explosive charge cooldown and you can play around the Caitlyn Q cooldown. Like, I think Caitlyn's Q should scale harder into the game. Maybe it needs to scale with attack speed in some way so that it moves forward. But essentially, I'm saying that, again, the level 18 power budget needs to come from the abilities in some way, which means they need to scale more aggressively than they do now in some form, without one-shotting you, because Tristana should not turn into Zed. That's not what I'm trying to do. But simply say, hey, if you play around explosive charge, that's actually a quarter of all of her damage output, and she is significantly nerfed if you can play around explosive charge and disengage her primary target. I think that would be a good thing. The second thing I want to do, the overall second piece, as we sort of talked about this a little bit, they're a bit related, is to give every single conventional crit marksman item attack damage. Rapid fire cannon, static shiv, hurricane, all those things. I know I'm just picking Zeal items, but those are the famous examples because people build two of them. Those items should have attack damage on them. I'm not sure whether or not you should rebalance Infinity Edge and Storm Razor and Bloodthirster and Last Whisper around that fact. or just simply these champions gain a little bit less crit, a little bit less attack speed, and more attack damage. And the reason is for smoother power curves. Again, let's think about Tristana as our primary example. Tristana scales off bonus attack damage and builds sometimes a Storm Razor, an Infinity Edge, a Rapid Fire Cannon, and a Static Shiv. 2 of those items give attack damage. Let's look at a typical Tristana item growth and ability growth. So she gets to level 9, she gets her BF sword, her 2 long swords, and she builds her Storm Razor. Okay, she's hit her first power spike, she's level 9 with a Storm Razor, and maxed E, she is there. Alright, she attacks you and she gets a crit on her first auto attack. She has decent follow-up damage. She's charging explosive charge. That does some good damage. Cool. Then she goes up to level 12 and she gains 3 more levels. Explosive charge gained 0 damage. She built a rapid fire cannon. She gained 0 damage. Explosive charge continued to gain no further damage. Now she wants to build Infinity Edge. Well, she has to save 100 or 1300 gold to build a BF sword. Only at that point, when you are 4,000 gold farther down your build, have you upgraded your E damage in any way. For, I'm going to make up a random number, 8 minutes. Explosive charge remained the exact same ability. Your attack speed went up slightly, so you can get your 4th trigger off a bit more often, but that's a fairly trivial change in power curve. Explosive charge is the same ability at level 13 that it was at level 9. There's no wonder that these champions lose agency in the mid-game. An ability that's good at level 9 and has the same damage at 13 is no longer good. Characters got a lot tankier. Other champions got a lot more damage. This ability fell off. Now, if it scaled off total AD, Tristana would have gained, 13 attack damage, and that would do very little, don't get me wrong. But, if you're building towards Zeal and that's got a pickaxe attached to it, you can smooth that power curve out slightly, and you can continue your growth a little bit. I'm keying this specifically off of how mages scale. I think most mages, even the hyperscaling ones that go into late game, like let's say Cassiopeia and Azir, not that they've been Bastion's amazing game design, but they have managed to remain relevant and do interesting things in the mid game despite having good late game power growth. And it's because you can buy a Lost Chapter and then turn that into a Luden's Echo. And then you buy a Nullifying Orb, not a Nullifying Orb, an Oblivion Orb. That gives you more ability power. That turns into a Melanomicon. That is more ability power. Then you build a Death Cap. That also gives you ability power. Then you build a Void Staff. Also gives ability power. And so even if you're trying to chase down unique passives or chasing down unique actives like Zhonya's Hourglass and Protobelt, you are still tacking on ability power at every stage. Sure, sometimes you buy a Kindle Gem and that's not ability power, but with every single item that mages ever buy, literally every item they buy in their entire outfit except for Sorcerer's Shoes, and if they really, really, really want an Abyssal Mask, they keep steadily growing in ability power. I think that should happen for marksman itemization as well. At least especially crit marksman itemization, those who don't naturally scale their abilities on their own. Ahri takes care of this because she's buying blasting wands every 3 minutes. Tristana can't do that, and I think that helps you smooth out the mid-game power curve a lot. Is it going to be weird for a while? Almost absolutely. That's going to be strange for quite some time, because you've got to figure out where can these items be balanced, how expensive do they need to be. Are you hitting the same sort of item thresholds that mages are, or are all your items 3,500 gold, and they're just worth a Zeal and a Kirchais Shard and a pickaxe, and then that all goes together? And the way that marksmen win in late game is they just have essentially more item slots because their items are 20% bigger. I don't know. There's a lot of ways this could eventually turn around. I don't have the answer for you. I'm more talking on a sort of high level. This is the things that I would do to reshape the role. Make explosive charge actually scale throughout game time because the items you're buying do it and your character leveling up does it. When Ahri goes from level 8 to level 9, she puts her 5th point in Q. Hits level 10 and puts more points in Foxfire, which is another spell that gains damage when it ranks up. And when she finally goes to level 14 and ranks in Charm don't mean very much, well, it's okay. She's still buying blasting wands. Tristana does not have this luxury. When she gets level 14 and puts a point in Rocket Jump, which does nothing, she's buying her 2nd Zeal, and her E is just falling off the face of the planet. I'm using Tristana as my primary example because she is the most obvious, but any of these crit scaling marksmen where they sit there and spend 5,600 gold on a rapid fire cannon and a static shiv and gain 0 attack damage from those items, their abilities sit there gaining nothing. Now again, I mentioned there are alternatives. There are other AD carries that do this well. I like how Kog'Maw and Vayne and Lucian work, and let's think about their builds. Lucian buys raw attack damage everywhere. Only if he stops for rapid fire cannon to go into a crit build does that slow down. And even then, there's synergy there because now your dash into long-range double shot is pretty good. But yeah, Lucian kind of power troughs while building rapid fire cannon if he doesn't go for Essence Reaver third and instead goes RFC third to go towards that. But look at Lucian's normal build. It's Blade of the Ruin King, 40 attack damage, and a Black Cleaver, 40 attack damage, and you can just go Essence Reaver next for another 70 or so attack damage, and from there you can go Last Whisper for another 50 or so attack damage, and you can have a smooth power curve, and lo and behold, Lucian remains popular and feels like he has agency the entire game. You look at a champion like Kog'Maw. Kog'Maw's W actually does scale with his purchases. He levels up and gains more attack speed. Other champions level up and gain more health for the W to be more powerful. He buys a Hurricane, which is normally feels weird for Tristana. No, that's great. Kog'Maw hits more targets with his W. Same for Kalista in this case, as well. Those are positive things. Every ability, or almost every ability, or at least your important ability, I should say, in Kog'Maw's W. Yeah, Kog'Maw's Q doesn't get better in an attack damage build. It just, you rank it up and it gives you more damage. That's fine because Kog'Maw's power budget and his decision-making budget and his skill sort of threshold and expression, really, comes from the W. And that's fine. I think that's an okay way to have the champion work. Yeah, he's a little simplistic on a mechanical level, but I think that's okay. I do think that the ultimate best solution, actually not even necessarily best solution, but it uses Vayne and Kog'Maw as good examples of this, is that crit marksmen, of course, want to win the game because they auto-attack you. And I don't want to alienate that. And I know that saying, hey, more of your damage should be an explosive charge and Piltover Peacemaker and maybe even volley flies in the face of that somewhat directly, because I'm saying, yes, you need to do less damage with auto-attacks in order for explosive charge to do more damage. Is this not a problem? And the answer is maybe. Like, maybe my proposed solution is actually bad for League of Legends, or at least bad for that class of champions. Maybe it actually is. I still think this is a cool idea, but maybe I'm wrong. Thankfully, there is a different alternative that's just a lot harder to do, and thus, me as a design team of one could not do that trivially in a patch. And it's that these champions should maybe be more differentiated in how they basic attack. Again, Kog'Maw, I think, and Kalista are good examples of this. Their basic attacks are unlike everyone else's basic attacks. Kog'Maw makes decisions about how and when he attacks. Yeah, you press A and click on a person and you don't miss ever, but your W is on and then it's off. Compare Kog'Maw W to Tristana Q. Tristana Q is sometimes off and it's like, well, I lost 30% of my DPS. Still Tristana. Kog'Maw is not Kog'Maw when W is off. Kalista, Rend being on cooldown, used to not let you land spears anymore, and it was a significant drop to your power. You suddenly were no longer, you were basically no longer Kalista if you ever failed a Rend reset. Now they eventually changed that, and now Rend stays on, but even still, you are playing around your Rend being on cooldown, and then if they disengage from you before you manage to pop Rend back out, they have managed to outplay your kit. Yeah, you're pressing A and clicking on them and like jumping forward to keep pressing A and clicking on them as Kalista, but like there is a gigantic power expression in using Rend, and that can be outplayed. A lot of her power budget is in an active ability, and that active ability stays relevant throughout the entirety of the game. And that's a really, really big deal. Lucian buys attack damage at almost every single buy. He only stops once for Rapid Fire Cannon, and that's the third item in, so he enjoys a very strong first 8,000 gold worth of buys. And he scales throughout the game. And this seems positive. This seems like a very good thing. Caitlyn has two abilities that she can max and feel good about. Q and W both give direct damage returns on rank up. So she has, just on a champion level perspective, every level gains more damage, and she has a smoother power curve. And her attacks are different. Yeah, her attacks are different because her attack range is higher, but she plays around her traps. Someone hit a trap. I need to go attack that person. I want to step in brush and get more headshots. Now, again, these things could be pushed farther. I don't think these champions are exceptionally well differentiated, right? Varus doesn't have this kind of decision-making. Varus is arguably the, easiest champion in the game. If you can play any marksman, you can play Varus. If you're level 30, you can play Varus. You just press your buttons on them and your things are always available all the time. There's not a lot of tough choices there. He just shoots arrows at you forever. There's no downtime. Your range is always 575. There's no steroids to plan around. Your cooldowns are pretty short. You just kind of press them whenever. Yeah, you can miss R, but skill shots are in almost every champion in League of Legends. It's not that big of a skill test. Now, I don't know how you differentiate Varus. I mean, the attempt was that, well, you auto-attack them and then, you land E and then land Q and pace it out properly. But, the damage difference on landing E and Q between auto attacks is not that high. Your power budget isn't enough in triggering your blight stacks, so your attacks aren't different. You attack them and press your buttons on them. Like, Varus's pattern and Tristana's pattern are the same pattern. You press E while auto-attacking them. Yeah, you time it differently, but it's the same pattern. And you do it once because that's your cooldowns. And so these champions need to be differentiated in some way. And one way to do that is, again, to push more of their power budget into their abilities. That's the only way you can really do that, ultimately, is that's the solution, is these champions are different because of their abilities. And the auto-attackers who do it well, their auto attacks are good because of abilities. Kalista and Kog'Maw and Vayne are great examples of this. Otherwise, these marksmen are good because of their spells, and Lucian is a good example of this. And Ashe, for her utility aspect, is this, but on the damage profile, she hits Q whenever it's up, and she does that some more. And so either you find a way, as I'm sort of talking through this and finding a third solution, you find ways to make auto attacks more interesting, and that takes a lot of time and a lot of design work and is very difficult, or you say, well, the abilities you already have on your kit are interesting, let's make them more important. And there are ways to do that, and that is reshaping item pathing and having them all give attack damage that your abilities actually scale and can remain relevant, because they don't typically, and making them scale just with game time on their own so that they scale into late game and are a bigger part. And again, the gains are, one, you can differentiate these champions, which feels like a very big positive. Number two is you can then smooth out power curves, which I think is actually a positive, because you can make them feel good about their mid games for when they're buying their rapid fire cannon and static shift and gaining 0 attack damage for 5,000 gold. And the third benefit is for players who are playing against the marksman. You gain counterplay, because Tristana's Q being down doesn't mean anything. She will still kill your Maokai because she's a 6 item Tristana, and that just happens. But if she has to play around explosive charge, and it resets every time you hit the fourth ability, and thus if you're able to tank the E and then flash out, and now she can't use explosive charge anymore, and thus it never resets her rapid fire and the E once again, suddenly you have found a window to lower all of Tristana's damage output, because half her damage was using QE or whatever. There are ways this works well, much in the way that kiting away from Kog'Maw W and then re-engaging when it's down works well. I think that is a positive direction for League of Legends. That's my opinion. Hopefully this was not too bad of a ramble, and I kept more or less on topic. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time.